Alright. Oh, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Get away from me. Ah, die, 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 die. That was fucking weird. Alright. Ah, shit! I live again. Hola, bicholas. Yes, I am finally back. Been busy as fuck, but I promise I'll be posting videos more often than like once a year from now on. Well, fuck it, here's one right now. So, if there's one thing that I love, it's classic horror games. There's just something about cheesy, pixelated blood and monsters that just does it for me. So for this video, I decided to find and play an old school horror game that I'd never tried before, and I ended up picking one based solely on the box art. Monster Party. So clearly this is a classic batshit crazy NES platformer, but it turns out the backstory behind this game is almost as weird as the game itself. Let's start it up and I'll explain. So right away I am down. That font, the green ooze, the jack-o'-lantern, and look at all those fucking cool monsters. Wait, is that a shrimp? An onion ring? Alright, fuck it, let's go. In Monster Party, you play an average kid by the name of Mark. While walking home from a baseball game with his trusty bat, Mark spots a bright light in the sky, which apparently makes his eyes moist. Ugh, do we really have to work that word in here? Anyway, the bright light falls to Earth, and it turns out it's actually an alien called fucking Bert? Really? So Bert's home planet is being taken over by monsters, and he needs Mark's help to defeat them. Because super powerful aliens needing help from random-ass little kids was a big fucking thing in the 80s for some reason. Bert apparently thinks Mark is some kind of warrior because he has a weapon, and when Mark tries to explain that it's just a baseball bat, Bert replies, "Bat? Batter? Anything is okay." Which is a fucking dumb joke. Anyway, he whisks Mark up into space, and then, so they can fight together as one, he fuses bodies with a little boy, which I'm pretty sure is illegal. And that's it. You're an epilepsy-inducing hybrid of a flying monster and a Little League player off to fight bad guys on an alien planet. And if you think that shit's weird, we are just getting started. First of all, let's just pause here for a moment. Nintendo was notorious for censorship back in the day. Absolutely no blood and gore allowed in any of their games. So how the fuck did these title screens slip by? It's literally mutilated skeletons in a giant pool of blood. See, now I'm getting into this because that's fucking awesome. As far as gameplay, Monster Party is a pretty standard 8-bit platformer. You make your way through a variety of levels full of monsters, using Mark's bat to beat the shit out of them. Every once in a while, a monster will drop a heart, which gives you health, or a pill, which allows you to temporarily transform into Bert for a short period of time. Because remember kids, drugs are awesome. Bert can't use Mark's bat as a weapon, but that's alright, because he can fly and shoot frickin' laser beams out of his eyes. Occasionally an enemy will also drop a question mark, which randomly gives you health, cool Bert drugs, or just a bunch of points. Remember back in the day when points were a thing? Every once in a while in a level you'll come across a door. While some of these are just empty rooms, some of them lead to boss fights, and man are there a shitload of boss fights, each one different and crazier than the last one. Once you've defeated every boss on a level, you get a key which allows you to open the exit at the end and get to the next level. It also gives you a code you can use to skip to that level later, since this was in the dark ages before being able to save your game was a thing. All in all, it's pretty standard Nintendo platformer stuff. Now what sets this game apart is just how fucking weird it is. Not so much the story, shit, this was back when a game about a plumber on mushrooms fighting turtles was a bestseller, but more specifically the bosses. The cover of this game implies that you'll be fighting monsters from classic movies. You've got fucking Dracula, Poltergeist, Troll, Little Shop of Horrors, Clash of the Titans, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and yet literally none of these bad guys actually appear as bosses in the game. You get a few pretty self-explanatory horror monsters like a big-ass spider, a big-ass snake, a jack-o'-lantern, a ghost, a minotaur, a haunted armor, the Grim Reaper, but some are just inexplicably fucking weird, like a potted plant, a cat who throws kittens at you, a caterpillar in a bed, javelin man, a well that throws plates at you, and of course, by far the fucking weirdest boss of all, fried food. And they all spit out these nonsensical one-liners when you first meet them too, like, "Hello, baby, please don't pick on me, and let's mix it up." Like, what the fuck does any of this mean? Of course, like most Nintendo games, this is from Japan, and a lot tends to get lost in translation when preparing a foreign game for American release. 80s Nintendo in particular had notoriously shitty translators and were known for censoring the hell out of everything. So maybe having a look at the original Japanese release would help the game make more sense. There's only one problem. There was no Japanese release. Monster Party was one of the earliest games developed by the Japanese company Human Entertainment, who would go on to make dozens of shitty, forgettable games over the years, most notably the Clock Tower and Fire Pro Wrestling series. But they never quite achieved mainstream success, and they went bankrupt in early 2000. Back in 1988, however, the company was alive and well and working on a new game called Monster Party. There were even articles written about it in Japanese gaming magazines. But, for reasons unknown, the game was shelved and never released. Fast forward to a year later, 1989, the middle of the American Nintendo craze when companies would release any damn thing if they thought they could make a buck off it. Bandai pulls Monster Party out of storage, heavily edits it, and releases it for the first time anywhere, here, in the USA. People play it, say stuff like, well, that was a fucking weird game, and then quickly forget about it. Still, a few of the more hardcore Nintendo nerds were always curious about what the original Japanese version was like. Did it actually make sense at one point, or was it always totally fucking weird and incomprehensible? Then, in 2011, a previously unknown copy of the original unreleased Japanese game surfaced on Yahoo Auctions. It was bought by a Japanese collector for the equivalent of about $6,000, but the guy was a selfish fucker and never released it to the public. Like, who are you, Martin fucking Shkreli? I want my Wu-Tang, damn it. Fortunately, another copy showed up on eBay in 2014, this time selling for just $2,600 to a non-douchebag who finally released the original game online for free. Of course, it was in Japanese, but it didn't take long for fans to translate it into English. Finally, we could play this weird-ass game the way it was originally intended. First, we have a way cooler title screen. I'll take buckets of blood and severed heads over green slime and pumpkins any day. Weirdly enough, this seems to be the only background that was censored in the US. The blood and gore on the title screen and in the levels was left unchanged. The story is almost exactly the same too. Of course, your name isn't Mark, it's Hiroshi, because you're fucking Japanese, duh. They don't use the word moist, thank Christ, and of course the monster isn't called fucking Bert. He's Varyu, which is a much more badass name for an alien. Also, his joke is way better. Bat? Butt? What's the difference? But besides that, though, the story is all the same shit. Alien boy hybrid off to another planet to fight monsters. Most of the game is pretty much identical, too. There are a few small changes to the level designs and enemies, and the Japanese version is definitely a bit harder. The real big revelation comes when you see the original boss fights. As it turns out, a bunch of the bosses were indeed supposed to be parodies of famous movie monsters, but they were censored in the US to avoid copyright issues, although they apparently didn't bother to censor the fucking box. So like that weird plant that says, "Hey baby," and shoots bubbles at you? That was originally supposed to be the singing killer plant from Little Shop of Horrors, who shoots musical notes at you and even has a little karaoke machine. That little jack-o'-lantern guy who apparently thinks you're gonna pick on him, that's actually supposed to be an ape from Planet of the Apes who wants to make you his slave. He chases after you on horseback and shoots a gun at you. There's even a fucked up Statue of Liberty in the background. That big-ass snake who apparently wants to mix it up and then throws fat little snakes at you, that's actually supposed to be Medusa from Clash of the Titans, who gives you her Tsuchinoko, which is not as sexy as it sounds. I'll explain that later. And the list goes on. This ghost guy was originally supposed to be the mummy. The giant spider was supposed to be the head monster from The Thing. That cat boss is actually supposed to be a mogwai from Gremlins, who then turns into a gremlin and throws little gremlins at you. Gremlins. That javelin guy is actually supposed to be the giant Japanese monster Daimajin, which, if you've never seen it, is pretty fucking awesome, actually. It's worth a rental. The Grim Reaper boss who throws little heads at you was supposed to be the xenomorph from Alien, who throws little face huggers at you. Some of the regular enemies are changed as well, like those little eggs that shoot bubbles at you in the sewers. Those are actually supposed to be the alien eggs that shoot face huggers at you. And those bats in the cave, those are supposed to be little Dracula guys. Also, that goalie-looking dude on the tower level, he's actually supposed to be Jason from Friday the 13th. Now, all of these changes were pretty obviously made to avoid copyright violations, but that doesn't explain all of the weird-ass enemies in the game, because some of them are also based on Japanese horror stories that just aren't well known in the US. So like that weird well that throws plates at you, that's based on a Japanese ghost story called Bansha Sariyashiki about a well haunted by the spirit of a servant girl who was thrown down it for losing a plate. That caterpillar boss is a parody of Imamushi by Edogawa Ranpo, which is a horror story about a war veteran who loses his arms and legs so he looks like a caterpillar and all he can do is lie around in bed all day. Little dark. Those weird fat little snakes that Medusa throws at you, those are Tsuchinoko, which are Japanese legendary fat little snakes for some reason. Similarly, these fucked up little things are a legendary Japanese creature called Jinmenken. They're dogs with human faces. I don't like them. And these cute little guys are Jiangshi, which is Chinese hopping vampires, which is the thing. In the US version, they changed them to ghosts because they figured nobody would know what the fuck a Jiangshi was, but oddly enough, they didn't bother to change any of the other weird mythical animals in the game. Anyway, once you get all these little references, Monster Party no longer comes across as an incomprehensibly weird game full of random bullshit, but rather an intentionally goofy parody of various horror monsters from movies and legend, which for me makes it a hell of a lot more entertaining. So, now that we've had a look at the original version of the game, let's get to the review. First and foremost, I like this game because it's funny. Once you know the whole thing's a parody, it explains that some of the weird shit the developers put in there are really just goofy gags. Like, pretty early in the game you come across butts just sticking out of the ground. Yeah, spank that ass. Or in the cave, you see bats on the ceiling that turn out to actually be vampire umbrellas. Or these sharks in the swamp who turn out to just be tiny little fish with enormous dorsal fins. There's these bad guys who look like the Elephant Man, but when you hit them, they turn into an actual elephant. And some of the bosses are clearly just gags too, like this guy you go to fight, but it turns out he's already dead, and he tells you. Or these dancing zombies, you try and kill them, but they just come right back to life, because they're zombies, so you literally just have to stand there and watch them dance until they fall apart. Or this punk rock guitarist boss who is literally assaulting you with how terrible his music is. And I gotta say, my favorite is this guy. So you're trying to figure out why you're fighting deep-fried shrimp until you notice those little pods in the background? Those kinda look like the ones from The Fly. That's right, folks. This is a Japanese game, and the boss is the Fry. First time I realized that, I laughed till I shit. All of these little jokes made what would otherwise just be an average Nintendo game into a genuinely charming and fun game to play. Another thing I liked about this game is the level design. So in most 8-bit platformers, a lot of the levels kind of look the same and they recycle the same tiles for multiple stages. In Monster Party, each level has a distinctly different horror-themed design. The first level starts with this goofy, over-the-top happy design with smiley faces everywhere and lots of pink, until you get halfway through the level and everything suddenly transforms into blood and gore and severed heads and missing limbs. It's awesome. The second level is a creepy underground sewer full of crocodiles and fish people and dripping blood. The third level is a dark cave with falling stalactites full of bloodthirsty bats and skeletons. The fourth level is an Egyptian tomb full of snakes and scorpions and shit, although weirdly enough this is not the level where you fight the mummy. Not sure what's up with that. Level 5 is a swamp filled with various sea monsters. Level 6 is a poltergeist house full of furniture that moves by itself and ghost pants. The whole thing's a giant maze. All the doors randomly take you to other doors on the level, so there's really no way to tell where you are. It's also the only level that only has one boss, but it's a pretty fucking cool one. It's this chameleon guy who hides against the background. Level 7 is the only vertical level. It's a castle tower full of monsters you have to climb one screen at a time. And I don't want to reveal too much about the final level or the bosses on it, but it takes place at the top of the tower up in the clouds, so you're fighting witches and fireworks and shit, and it also features one of the goriest cutscenes ever seen on the NES. Like, again, how the fuck did they get that by the censors? No two levels are alike, and they all have completely different enemies, so it makes you want to keep playing the game just to see what the next one's gonna be. And lastly, I gotta say, the controls on this are pretty damn good. The physics when you're moving around and jumping feel pretty good, which is something a lot of Nintendo games fuck up. The platform games on Action 52 being a perfect example of this, those are fucking god-awful. Controlling Hiroshi feels more like Mega Man. You know, a good game. Flying works well too. You use the A button to flap Bert's wings and get a little boost of altitude every time, kinda like a fucked up Flappy Bird. You can do a pretty sweet little dive bomb thing as well. And the switching characters mechanic works really well, because each has their own strengths. Hiroshi is slow and can only jump so high, but his bat can deflect monsters' projectiles back at them and kill them. Varyu can't defend himself, but he can fly and has a ranged attack. Both characters come in handy in certain situations throughout the game. For example, the vertical tower climb level is a huge pain in the ass as Hiroshi, but Varyu can fly right up that motherfucker no problem. And Hiroshi is far more useful at defeating certain enemies who can only be safely killed by bouncing their projectiles back at them. It's all pretty well designed and makes for a challenging game without being annoying. And now on to the complaints. My first issue is with some of the elements of combat, and I know I just spent time praising the controls, but I still have a couple of gripes. First of all, when you're deflecting projectiles with Hiroshi's bat, it's really hard to target them. There seems to be some kind of timing to it to get them to go in the direction you want, but it's so exact and hard to nail that most of the time it'll just be dumb luck. It's also tough to hit enemies if they're above you with the bat while you're jumping, so you'll end up kind of jumping up and down and swinging wildly for longer than you really want to. On the flip side, I kind of feel like they overpowered Varyu. Varyu fucking wrecks. His laser can kill most enemies in the game in just a couple hits, including a few of the bosses. And it also lets you skip huge chunks of the level because you can just fly over everybody. Again, not huge issues, but they are noticeable. I also had some issues with the enemy AI, or what little of it there is on the NES. Almost all the enemies in the game just walk back and forth on a set path, which means if they have high hit points and all you have is Hiroshi's bat, you pretty much just stand there and wait for them to come near you, hit them a few times, and then stand there and wait for them to come back again. It gets old really quick. Enemies also respawn as soon as you walk off screen, and the same bad guy always drops the same power-ups, which makes it really easy to farm them for health and pills. I kind of feel like the developers knew that, because after a while they will stop dropping items if you hit the same guy too many times. Still, it's not great game design. And lastly, although I do say it a lot, the game is too short. It only has 8 levels. Compare that to Super Mario Bros. 32. I feel like this is probably because the developers spent most of their time focusing on making interesting boss battles and cool backgrounds, and not so much on creating a whole shitload of levels. But still, you could probably beat this thing in like under an hour. I personally would have liked to see more. So at the end of the day, I gotta give Monster Party a solid 7 butts out of 10. It doesn't break a lot of new ground, but it's pretty well designed, it's funny, and it's a lot of fun to play for a horror fan like myself. So how do you actually get a hold of this game to play it? Monster Party was released in 1989 as a US-only Nintendo cartridge, and it's never been re-released. It's a pretty obscure game, so you won't find it on the Virtual Console or on the NES Classic Edition, but if you still have a working NES, you can find copies on eBay for about $20. However, this is the censored version. If you want to play the original uncensored Japanese version, well, you've got to get really lucky and have several $1,000s, as well as a Japanese NES, aka Famicom, on hand so you can play it. Fortunately, the original version of the game and an English translation patch have both been released online for free, so your best bet is probably just to play it on an emulator. My personal favorite is Nestopia UE, which is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And thanks to RetroArch, you can also run Nestopia on Android or iOS. There's even a couple of tricks that'll let you run it on Xbox One or Nintendo Switch, so you're really only screwed if you're using a PS4. I've included links in the description to where you can download the original Japanese game, the fan translation to English, as well as all the emulators I just mentioned, so you guys can have a blast beating up as many butts as you like. Okay, he's Royce. And he rolls. Great job, Nintendo translators. Great job. Till next time, stay sexy.